Hashtag what the tree was hiding. My ward dog started screaming at a tree. Hours later, I uncovered a secret that had been buried for 32 years. I'm a homeless Navy SEAL, and I found a strange growth swelling out of an old pine. My dog already knew what was inside. A dog that had faced combat without flinching suddenly froze in front of that tree, trembling like death itself was standing inside it. I thought it was just a deformity in the bark. By the next sunset, I'd uncovered something that would shake an entire county. Before we begin, comment 1 if you trust the dog's instincts, 0 if you'd cut into the tree yourself, and tell us where you're watching from. Late autumn settled over Montana's sapphire mountains like a slow tide of golden gray. For most people, those peaks looked beautiful. For me, they felt safe. There's a difference. Beauty attracts visitors. Safety keeps people away. That's why I stayed. My name's Cole Reeves. My cabin sits alone on a forgotten ridge, 15 miles from the nearest paved road, an old trapper's place nobody ever claimed. At 57, I move with the careful caution of a man whose body remembers every injury it ever took. Scar across my cheek, another under my collar, dark hair gone silver at the temples. But I'm still strong. Mountain life demands it. The wilderness doesn't care about excuses. Beside me walks Ranger. My German Shepherd moves through the forest with effortless confidence, black and tan going gray around the muzzle. Those eyes have seen battlefields. He isn't just a dog. He's a retired military canine, a veteran, the closest thing to family I have left. We served together overseas, and when he retired, I made sure we stayed together. Now we share the same lonely life among the mountains, and neither of us is interested in changing it. That morning, I shouldered the axe. Let's find enough wood for a few days, buddy. A single wag. Agreement. We spent most of the morning gathering deadfall, Ranger weaving ahead, sniffing the wind. Then, suddenly, he froze. Not slowed, not hesitated. Every muscle locked, ears rigid, tail dropping. A low sound came from his throat, closer to uncertainty than a growl. That alone raised the hair on my neck. Ranger isn't afraid of much. Bears, mountain lions, gunfire, none of it bothers him. Yet here he was rooted to the ground. I followed his stare to an enormous ancient pine on a slight rise. Halfway up the trunk, something looked wrong. A swelling bulged outward, nearly 3 feet. Too smooth, too rounded, almost deliberate, like something had expanded inside the tree. The bark had split in places, and dark streaks ran down the trunk. Sap, I thought, except the color was wrong. Too dark, almost black. Then the smell hit me, sour, faint, the kind of wrong that triggers survival instinct. Ranger barked, sharp and urgent, and took a step backward. He never backs away from anything. I stepped closer. The smell got worse. My old instinct stirred, the kind that kept me alive on missions when danger showed itself in tiny details. After a moment, I stepped away, and Ranger relaxed just slightly. That night, he wouldn't leave my side. He pressed against my leg through dinner, stayed awake long after dark, and around midnight, I woke to find him at the window, staring toward the ridge, toward that tree. For the first time in years, I felt uneasy inside these mountains. Something was wrong, something hidden, something waiting. Sleep didn't really come. When it did, the dreams came with it. A dusty foreign village, gunfire between concrete walls, a face I couldn't save. Then the dream shifted to a hospital room, soft machines, my wife Maggie thin and fading. You weren't here, she whispered, and disappeared before I could touch her. Same as every night. I woke gasping, and Ranger left the window to rest his muzzle on my knee, grounding me, bringing me back. Yeah, buddy, I'm here. Maggie spent 24 years trying to save me, trying to compete with ghosts. She deserved better. By the time I understood that, cancer had already taken her faster than I could learn how to be a husband again. Then I lost my son, Danny, too. The calls got rarer, the visits stopped, and eventually there was nothing left between us but years of distance. I couldn't even blame him. The unease about that tree wouldn't leave. By that evening, with snow drifting from the sky, my decision had formed. Tomorrow I'd go back, bring tools, and find out why a battle-tested military dog feared a tree more than he'd ever feared death. The storm cleared before dawn. We climbed the snowy ridge, and the forest was strangely silent. No birds, no squirrels, just the crunch of boots. Ranger stopped 50 yards from the pine and refused to go farther. Then he did something I'd never seen. He stepped in front of me, blocking my path, and barked. Not aggressive, not frightened. Pleading. Don't go. I knelt, scratched his ears. I need to know. I approached alone. The smell was overwhelming now, rot mixed with pine resin. The swelling towered over me, disturbingly symmetrical, like the tree had grown around something. I raised the hatchet. The first strike echoed. By the third, the wood felt soft, hollow, and then the blade punched through into empty space. A cavity inside the trunk. I set down the hatchet and raised my work light. The beam caught fabric. Dark old, weathered, but unmistakably man-made. My stomach dropped. I widened the opening, and the light moved across more fabric, a metal buckle, a zipper, and then bone. I stepped back so fast the light shook in my hand. Human remains inside the tree. The swelling wasn't a disease. The tree had grown around a body. From his distance, Ranger let out a long, mournful whine, like he'd known from the very beginning. The cavity held fragments of clothing, a leather belt, rusted metal, the remains of hiking boots, all decades old. Whoever this had been, they'd vanished a long time ago, and the tree had become a living tomb, hiding a grave in plain sight. As the light faded, something caught the edge of my beam, a small leather object, rectangular, half hidden in the folds of fabric. A wallet. It might hold a name, a story, answers. But daylight was dying, and the tree had kept its secret for decades. It could wait one more night. Ranger and I started the long walk home. The next morning I went back, not out of curiosity anymore, but obligation. A person had died up there. The least I could do was learn their name. I worked with patience this time, laying every item on a tarp. Then I found the wallet. The leather had darkened, but tree sap had partly preserved it. Inside the third compartment was an identification card, and after more than 30 years, the dead man finally had a name. Marcus Reyes. The photo showed a man in his 30s, dark hair, friendly eyes, an easy smile. The kind of face that belonged to someone who expected a future. A folded newspaper clipping in the wallet read, Environmental Investigation Team. Marcus Reyes hadn't been a hiker who got lost. He'd come to these mountains for work. A water-damaged notebook confirmed it. Maps, coordinates, field entries, professional records. I drove 2 hours into Cedar Hollow, a small Montana town frozen in time, and spent the afternoon in the library archives. Then I found it, a headline from 32 years earlier. Local environmental investigator missing. Marcus Reyes, age 34, vanished during a review of land development projects throughout the county. Search teams looked for weeks. No trace was ever found. The case went cold. There was a photo of him beside a smiling woman, holding hands outside a small house. Ordinary moments, the kind that disappear forever when someone never comes home. For the first time, the mystery became personal. Marcus Reyes wasn't just a skeleton. He was a husband. Someone had loved him. Someone had waited. When I got back to the truck, Ranger suddenly stiffened, staring toward an old road leading into the mountains, a growl building in his chest. He was reacting to something tied to where Marcus Reyes had disappeared. Back at the cabin, I spread Reyes's belongings across the table and read the notebook by lantern light. Early pages described routine surveys. Then the tone changed, more cautious, more suspicious. Several permit records don't match actual land usage. Locals seem nervous when certain properties are mentioned. This wasn't a routine survey. Reyes had found something people didn't want examined. Irregular land transactions, protected areas suddenly open for development, environmental reports vanishing, official records altered. Someone powerful had been manipulating the system. Then I reached the final entries, dated October 14th, 32 years earlier. The handwriting rushed and uneven. Asterisk meeting arranged tomorrow. Source claims to have documents proving illegal activity. Asterisk and the last line pressed darker into the page, like he wanted someone to remember it. If anything happens to me, Sheriff Roy Dalton knows where to look. The cabin went silent. Everyone in Cedar Hollow knew that name. Roy Dalton had been sheriff for decades, a local legend, the kind of lawman whose photo hung on diner walls. Yet here he was, in the final notebook entry of a dead man hidden in a tree. Maybe Reyes had meant to meet him for help. But if so, why had he ended up inside that pine? Then Ranger growled, deep and controlled, staring at the window. I killed the lantern. Through a gap in the curtain, I saw it, a shadow moving between the trees, far beyond the cabin, watching. It vanished. A hiker wouldn't be here at this hour, this far out. Whoever it was had come deliberately. Later, headlights appeared briefly through the dark, then vanished, like someone had finished watching and decided to leave. The pieces were connecting. A dead investigator, a respected sheriff, a hidden body, a watcher outside my cabin. And the connection turned my stomach. Marcus Reyes hadn't just uncovered environmental violations. He found something worth killing for. The next night, Ranger's growl came again, and this time, footsteps in the snow. Not one set, several, moving carefully, circling, testing. I killed the lantern and watched through a crack in the wall. 3 men, maybe 4, dark winter clothing, no flashlights. People who belonged here would use lights. People trying not to be seen don't. They moved with coordination, one to the porch, one to the truck, one around back. A beam flashed through a window. A voice drifted through the storm. Asterisk, check the back. Asterisk, they'd come for me, or for what I'd found. I shoved the notebook and wallet into my jacket, evidence first, and we went out the rear window into the snow. The moment my boots hit the ground, a shout went up. Asterisk, back there. Asterisk, we ran. The mountains became a maze of shadows, but I knew these ridges. Ranger suddenly veered left, and a flashlight beam swept the trail we'd just abandoned. His instincts saved us. For an hour the chase went on, and then a figure stepped from behind a tree and lunged. Ranger exploded between us, drove the man into the snow, and the attacker fled. But when Ranger came back, he was limping, blood staining the snow from a deep cut along his shoulder. Not life-threatening, but the sight of it terrified me more than any enemy ever had. For years I told myself I had nothing left to lose. I'd been wrong. We sheltered the night in a rock overhang, and I bandaged Ranger's shoulder with a torn thermal shirt. I read the notebook again and found a sequence of coordinates in the margins. A trail leading deep into the mountains north of Cedar Hollow, far beyond any road. Reyes had been tracking something. The next day, we followed it, and at the final coordinate, the forest opened into a hidden valley and a facility that should not have existed. Buildings, vehicles, generators, fencing, smoke rising from chimneys, fresh tire tracks. According to every map, this place had been an abandoned logging station for decades. Yet it was very much alive, disguised, structures painted to blend in, roads hidden under tree cover, equipment under camouflage netting. Through binoculars, I saw barrels stacked behind one building, marked with hazardous material symbols. A stream ran through the property, its water an unnatural color, dark streaks winding downstream beneath the snow. Illegal dumping. Marcus Reyes would have noticed it immediately, and the moment he did, he became a threat. Then a black SUV rolled in, and a man stepped out I recognized from photos in town, Sheriff Roy Dalton. He walked inside with the comfortable familiarity of a man returning somewhere he knew well. If anything happens to me, Sheriff Roy Dalton knows where to look. Reyes hadn't been naming a witness. He'd been naming a suspect. Circling the perimeter, I found something worse, an old storage shed full of abandoned gear. Backpacks, camping equipment, personal belongings, some tagged with names and dates going back decades. A rusted hunting license. A journalist's press card. Marcus Reyes wasn't the only one. This wasn't a single murder. It was a pattern, a machine that had operated for years. As darkness fell, Ranger growled again. Outside the main office, several men had gathered, Dalton among them, and one of them pointed, not at the buildings, but up at the ridge where we were hiding. We needed help from outside the system, someone federal, someone Reyes might have trusted. The nearest federal land office was 40 miles away in Missoula. There I found Kate Sullivan, early 30s, sharp eyes, practical boots, more comfortable in the mountains than behind a desk. When I showed her Reyes's ID card, her whole face changed. "You found Marcus Reyes?" She'd been investigating pieces of his case for almost 3 years. Her father had worked with him and always believed the investigation had been wrong. "The official story never made sense," she said. Then every file connected to his work started disappearing. Records gone from archives. Reports deleted. Permit files lost. For decades, we dug for hours. A reference number in Reyes's notebook led Kate to a federal permit file that appeared on her screen, then vanished, but not before she saw enough. A permit authorizing operations in that exact valley, signed by county officials, dated 6 months after Reyes disappeared. Someone had retroactively legalized an operation that already existed. Someone had rewritten history. We found a journalist named Walter Finch, missing 22 years earlier. His final article draft mostly censored except one surviving line about toxic dumping and protection from local officials. Same valley, same silence. Then Ranger growled at the window. Across the street, a dark SUV idled, the driver watching the building. The same kind of vehicle I'd seen entering the compound. It pulled away. "You think we're being watched?" Kate asked. "I know we are." It came less than a day later. Kate found unauthorized access logs on her files overnight. Someone had targeted our investigation specifically. Then her phone buzzed with a county alert. "Missing veteran may be armed and disoriented." My photo. The article called me a homeless veteran with severe PTSD, unstable, potentially dangerous, possibly delusional. Every word chosen not to find me, but to discredit me, so that if I came forward, I'd sound exactly like what they described. Dalton wasn't just protecting himself. He was weaponizing my own history against me. And the worst part was that some part of me still half believed those things about myself. We drove mountain back roads, avoiding towns. The signs were familiar: tightening chest, racing thoughts, scanning every mirror. Combat fragments crept into the edges of my mind. Then Ranger nudged my arm once, twice, and pulled me back into the present. We reached an isolated cabin owned by a retired ranger Kate trusted, who'd passed years earlier. That night, a nightmare took me. Combat, lost friends, Maggie standing among them, disappointed, and I woke shaking, unable to tell dream from reality, until 70 pounds of German Shepherd crashed onto the bed, pressed his nose to my face, and refused to leave until the panic faded. Then Kate's voice cut through the dark, sharp and alarmed. On her laptop was a message, 3 words, no signature. We found her. Her younger sister lived alone in Bozeman. This wasn't about evidence anymore. It was personal. The people behind this had spent decades making witnesses disappear, and now Kate had become one. Neither of us slept. By dawn, we reached Kate's sister, safe, confused. The relief lasted minutes, because Kate's phone held a photo of her leaving the federal office 2 days earlier. They'd been following her. We decided the evidence had to reach federal investigators outside Montana. We spent hours organizing everything: Reyes's notebook, permit records, photos from the valley. Then Kate stepped out to retrieve backup copies from her car. She never came back. When Ranger's ears snapped up and a growl rolled out of him, I ran outside. Her car, door hung open, documents scattered in the snow. Kate was gone. Multiple sets of tracks, fresh, a brief struggle, a vehicle. Ranger lowered his nose and began tracking instantly. The old military K-9 completely awake. The trail led into the mountains, toward the same region where Marcus Reyes had vanished. For hours, through worsening snow, Ranger never slowed. By late afternoon, I saw it. An abandoned mining facility, collapsed buildings, and rusted machinery half buried in the storm. But the fresh tire tracks gave it away. It was active. Worse, I saw crates of fuel and industrial explosives, enough to level the buildings. They weren't protecting the operation anymore. They were preparing to destroy it, and Kate with it. Ranger pulled toward a dark maintenance building set apart from the others. Through the window, I saw Kate, bound to a chair, alive. Then Sheriff Dalton walked in. He paced in front of her. "You should have stayed out of it." Marcus didn't listen either. He found things he wasn't supposed to find. 32 years of mystery collapsed into one terrible truth. Marcus Reyes had been murdered for what he discovered, and Roy Dalton had ordered it. "Once this place burns tonight," Dalton said, gesturing at the explosives, "nobody will ever prove anything." The moment had arrived. I moved. Chaos erupted across the facility. Ranger crossed the distance to Kate's building in seconds. Kate kicked her chair sideways, by me the doorway. Dalton retreated toward the yard as men scrambled. Then an armed man rose from behind a vehicle and aimed at me. Ranger saw it first, always first, and launched himself, knocking the man's aim wide. But this time he didn't get back up right away. He collapsed into the snow, a deep gash across his side, blood staining the white. Not fatal, but serious. For a moment, nothing else existed. Then his tail moved, once, twice. "I'm still here." And through the storm came sirens. Federal sirens. Someone had finally received the evidence. Dalton stood frozen, watching the lights close in, fear finally in his eyes. The network unraveled fast once federal investigators got inside. Illegal dumping, forged permits, land fraud, witness intimidation, missing persons, dozens of names, some corrupt officials, some victims. Families who'd waited years began getting calls they never expected. I watched most of it from a quiet vet clinic outside Missoula, where Ranger lay under a warm blanket, expected to make a full recovery. The most important words I'd heard in years. One afternoon, Kate came in carrying an archive box of evidence recovered from Reyes's belongings. She pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed with age, never mailed, Reyes's handwriting on the front. From my daughter. His wife had been pregnant when he disappeared. For 32 years, a child had grown up without knowing what happened to her father, and without this letter. Inside, Reyes wrote to a child he'd never meet. About hope, about protecting forests and public land, about honesty and service. Near the end, one paragraph stopped me cold. He wrote about volunteering with organizations that helped homeless veterans struggling after their service, because he believed nobody should be forgotten. The words describe my own life. Decades earlier, a man I'd never met had dedicated part of his life to helping people exactly like me. They found his daughter, Laura Bennett, a 32-year-old schoolteacher in Helena who'd spent her whole life wondering. She drove to Missoula herself. When Kate handed her the letter, her hands trembled, and she read it in silence while even the federal agents looked away. "My mother never stopped believing he'd come home," she finally said. Afterward, she shook my hand. "My father finally came home." It nearly broke me. Then Kate showed me one more thing in Reyes's records. He'd been building a charitable foundation before he vanished. Housing assistance for struggling veterans, job placement, emergency support. It had never been finished. The money had disappeared with him. Spring came slowly to the sapphires, and for the first time in years I noticed it. 3 months after the arrests, I stood again beneath the ancient pine. The swelling was gone. Investigators had removed the remains, and only a healing scar of exposed wood remained. Ranger stood beside me, stronger now, his limp nearly gone, and stared at the tree, then calmly sat. No fear. Whatever darkness had lingered here for decades had finally lifted. Laura Bennett came up the trail with wildflowers, and we walked to a simple memorial overlooking the valley, a circle of local stone, a bronze plaque, benches facing the mountains. She told me stories about the father she never knew, including how much of his free time he'd spent helping homeless veterans, dreaming of a housing program. Life had brought us together through tragedy. Now, maybe he was offering something else, purpose. Funds recovered from the operation were redirected to create a veterans housing initiative bearing his name. The Marcus Reyes Veterans Transition Center. Housing, counseling, job training, recovery, hope. Donations poured in from across Montana, then the country. Veterans volunteered, and at the heart of it stood an unlikely symbol. Ranger, who became beloved across the region. Nobody knew how a military dog sensed the truth hidden inside a tree. Nobody cared. Without him, none of it would have happened. The center opened in early autumn. I almost skipped the dedication. Crowd still made me uneasy, but Ranger refused to leave my side, and that made it easier. Near the end of the ceremony, a man in his early 30s stepped out of the crowd, dark hair, uncertain steps, and stopped a few feet away. Dad. My son, Danny, the son who'd stopped speaking to me years ago. Ranger stood, tail wagging, remembering him. I've been following the story, Danny said quietly. I think Mom would have been proud of what you did. For years, I carried guilt like a weight around my neck. Some of it lifted then, not gone, but lighter. We embraced under the autumn sky. No perfect reconciliation, just two broken people choosing to try again. Sometimes that's enough. That evening, I returned to the pine one last time. Ranger sat beside the memorial, the same loyal presence that had never left. The stone reflected the fading light, 3 words engraved beneath Marcus Reyes's name. Asterisk truth. Healing. Second chances. Asterisk the tree had once hidden death and corruption. Now it stood beside justice, family, and hope. For the first time in many years, I no longer felt homeless, no longer felt lost, no longer felt alone. Because sometimes healing begins in the strangest places. Sometimes truth grows hidden beneath decades of silence. And sometimes a faithful dog sees what the rest of the world has forgotten. If you believe the truth always finds its way to the surface, comment yes below. And if you've ever seen loyalty, courage, or perseverance change someone's life, I'd love to hear your story and where you're watching from. Subscribe and join us for more stories of justice, dignity, and second chances across the American frontier.